Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the airfield, watching the massive F-35 Lightning II fighter jets lined up like sleeping giants. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete, and she could feel the weight of every stare from the other pilots gathering behind her. At 26, she was the youngest pilot ever selected for this special mission, and definitely the only woman among the elite squadron. "There's no way she can handle that machine," whispered Captain Rodriguez to his friend. "Those jets aren't toys. They require strength, precision, and nerves of steel." Sarah pretended not to hear, but her jaw tightened. She had been hearing comments like this since the day she first walked into flight school 8 years ago. Back then, her instructor had laughed when she said she wanted to fly fighter jets. "Maybe you should consider transport planes," he had suggested with a condescending smile. "They're more suitable for people like you." Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah had always been fascinated by aircraft. Her father worked at a local airport, and she spent countless hours watching planes take off and land. While other kids played with dolls or video games, Sarah built model airplanes and read aviation magazines. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of fighter jets, and she knew the specifications of every military aircraft by heart. When she turned 18, Sarah applied to the Air Force Academy despite her parents' concerns. "The military is a man's world," her mother had worried. "You'll face challenges that other recruits won't have to deal with." Her mother was right. From day one at the academy, Sarah faced skepticism and discrimination. During physical training, instructors pushed her harder than others, waiting for her to quit. During flight simulations, her scores were scrutinized more carefully. When she excelled, some attributed it to luck or special treatment. When she struggled, they said it proved women weren't cut out for combat aviation. But Sarah refused to give up. She studied harder, trained longer, and pushed herself beyond every limit. She graduated third in her class and earned her wings as a fighter pilot. Even then, the challenges continued. Squadron leaders were hesitant to assign her to important missions. Fellow pilots questioned her abilities during briefings. Ground crews sometimes double-checked her pre-flight inspections, assuming she might miss something important. The breaking point came 6 months ago during a routine training exercise. Sarah was flying her F-16 when another pilot made a critical error that could have resulted in a mid-air collision. Sarah's quick thinking and precise maneuvering prevented disaster, saving both aircraft and their pilots. Instead of praise, she received criticism for showing off and taking unnecessary risks. That night, Sarah sat in her quarters and seriously considered requesting a transfer to transport planes, or even leaving the military altogether. The constant battle against prejudice was exhausting. She called her father, seeking advice. "Mitja," he said in his gentle voice, "do you remember what you told me when you were 10 years old? You said you wanted to fly so high that you could touch the clouds and protect people from the sky. Have you given up on that dream?" Sarah wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "No, Papa. I haven't." "Then don't let anyone else make you give up on it either." 3 weeks later, Sarah received orders that would change everything. She was selected for Operation Thunderstrike, a classified mission that required the most skilled pilots available. The briefing room fell silent when she walked in. 12 elite pilots had been chosen, and she was the only woman among them. Colonel Peterson, the mission commander, addressed the group. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are here because you represent the best of the best. This mission will test every skill you've learned and push you beyond your comfort zones." He explained that enemy forces had established heavily fortified positions in a disputed territory. Intelligence reports indicated they were planning a major offensive that could destabilize the entire region. The mission required surgical strikes against 12 specific targets, all heavily defended by advanced anti-aircraft systems. "We need pilots who can think quickly, adapt to changing situations, and execute precision strikes under extreme pressure," Colonel Peterson continued. "The enemy won't show mercy, and neither can we." As the briefing continued, Sarah noticed the sideways glances from other pilots. She heard whispered conversations during breaks. "This isn't the place for experiments in gender equality," one pilot muttered. "Lives are at stake." Another pilot, Captain Williams, was more direct. With all due respect, Colonel, are we sure Martinez is ready for something this intense? Combat missions aren't training exercises. Colonel Peterson's expression hardened. Captain Martinez earned her place here through performance, not politics. Her simulation scores are among the highest I've ever seen, and her tactical knowledge is exceptional. But the damage was done. As the pilots filed out of the briefing room, Sarah could feel the doubt and resentment radiating from her colleagues. They saw her as a liability, a weak link that could compromise the entire mission. That evening, Sarah walked to the flight line where the F-35s were being prepared. These weren't the F-16s she was used to flying. The F-35 Lightning II was the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, packed with cutting-edge technology and capable of incredible performance. It was also notoriously difficult to master, with complex systems that required exceptional skill and concentration. As she approached her assigned aircraft, she found Chief Master Sergeant Thompson performing maintenance checks. He looked up. As she approached, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "First time with an F-35, Martinez?" "Yes, Chief. I've studied the manuals and completed simulator training, but this will be my first actual flight." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "These machines are different from anything else you've flown. They're smarter, faster, and more powerful, but they're also less forgiving of mistakes. The pilots who succeed with F-35s are those who respect the aircraft and understand that it's a partnership, not a conquest." Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's sleek surface. "I understand, Chief. I won't let you down." "I don't think you will," Thompson replied with a slight smile. "But it's not me you need to prove anything to. These other pilots, they're good men, but they're carrying baggage that has nothing to do with flying. Don't let their doubts become your doubts." As darkness fell over the airfield, Sarah remained by her aircraft, studying every detail and visualizing the upcoming mission. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of her skills, determination, and courage. She thought about all the people who had doubted her over the years, all the obstacles she had overcome, and all the dreams that had brought her to this moment. The enemy wouldn't care that she was a woman. The F-35 wouldn't fly differently because of her gender. Success or failure would come down to skill, preparation, and the will to succeed. Sarah had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, and she was ready to prove that merit, not prejudice, should determine who flies into battle. The alarm pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 400 hours. Sarah had barely slept, her mind running through mission scenarios and emergency procedures. She dressed quickly in her flight suit and made her way to the briefing room where the other pilots were already gathering. The atmosphere was tense, filled with nervous energy and whispered conversations. Colonel Peterson stood at the front of the room, his face grave. "Gentlemen and Martinez, the situation has changed overnight. Intelligence reports indicate the enemy has accelerated their timeline. What we thought was a planned offensive next week is now happening today. We launch in 2 hours." A detailed map appeared on the screen showing the target area. 12 red dots marked enemy positions, each one heavily fortified and strategically important. The targets included communication centers, weapons depots, radar installations, and command posts. Destroying them would cripple the enemy's ability to coordinate their offensive and buy time for friendly ground forces to establish defensive positions. The weather forecast shows storm clouds moving into the area, the meteorologist reported. "Visibility will be limited and you'll be flying through rain and turbulence. Electronic warfare conditions are expected to be severe, with enemy jamming systems active throughout the region." Captain Rodriguez raised his hand. "Sir, with these conditions, shouldn't we consider postponing the mission?" "Negative, Colonel," Peterson replied firmly. "Our ground forces are already moving into position. They're counting on us to clear the way. Postponement isn't an option." Sarah studied the mission parameters carefully. Each pilot would be assigned one primary target and one backup. The attacks had to be coordinated precisely, with all 12 targets struck within a 30-minute window to prevent the enemy from adapting their defenses. "Martinez," the colonel called out, "you're assigned Target 7, the communication hub in Sector Delta. It's one of the most heavily defended positions, but it's also critical to their command structure." Several pilots turned to look at Sarah with surprise. Target 7 was known to be surrounded by advanced surface-to-air missile systems and protected by skilled enemy pilots. It was exactly the kind of assignment typically given to the most experienced squadron members. After the briefing, Captain Williams approached Sarah in the hallway. "Martinez, I need to ask you something directly. Are you sure you're ready for this? Target 7 isn't just dangerous, it's practically suicide. The enemy has their best defenses concentrated around that position." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Captain, I appreciate your concern, but I'm as ready as anyone here. I've trained for missions like this my entire career." "Training isn't combat," Williams persisted. "When those missiles start flying and enemy fighters come after you, simulation scores don't matter. What matters is how you react when death is staring you in the face." "Then I guess we'll find out together," Sarah replied calmly. In the equipment room, Sarah methodically checked her flight gear. Her helmet was fitted with the advanced display systems that interfaced with the F-35's sophisticated electronics. Her survival vest contained emergency supplies, communication devices, and other equipment that could mean the difference between life and death if she was forced to eject over enemy territory. Chief Thompson appeared beside her as she completed her equipment check. "How are you feeling, Martinez?" "Nervous," Sarah admitted honestly, "but ready." "Good. Nervous pilots stay alive because they don't take unnecessary risks. Overconfident pilots end up in body bags." He handed her a small card. "My daughter made this for me before my first combat mission 20 years ago. I've carried it on every dangerous flight since then." Sarah looked at the card, which had a child's drawing of an airplane with the words, "Come home safe, Daddy," written in crayon. She tried to hand it back, but Thompson shook his head. "Keep it for today. Bring it back to me tonight and tell me about how you proved all those doubters wrong." The walk to the flight line felt surreal. Dawn was breaking over the horizon, painting, the sky in shades of orange and pink. The storm clouds were visible in the distance, dark and threatening. The F-35 sat ready for flight, their engines already warming up and filling the air with the distinctive whine of modern jet turbines. Sarah approached her aircraft and began the pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. Every system had to be perfect because there would be no second chances once the mission began. She checked control surfaces, weapon systems, fuel levels, and electronic equipment. The F-35 was loaded with precision-guided missiles and sophisticated electronic warfare pods designed to counter enemy defenses. As she completed her inspection, Sarah noticed that several of the other pilots were watching her. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. She overheard Captain Rodriguez talking to his wingman. "I just hope she doesn't panic when things get rough. The last thing we need is someone freezing up in the middle of combat." "Maybe we should suggest she stays back as reserve," the wingman replied. "Let the real combat pilots handle the dangerous targets." Sarah bit back her angry response and continued her preparations. She had learned long ago that words wouldn't change minds, only actions would. Today would be her chance to prove that she belonged among the elite pilots, regardless of what anyone thought about her gender. The final mission. Briefing took place on the flight line, with engines running and pilots ready to climb into their cockpits. Colonel Peterson reviewed the timeline one more time, emphasizing the importance of precision timing and communication. "Remember, you're not just individual pilots today. You're part of a coordinated strike force. Each of you has a specific role to play, and the success of the entire mission depends on everyone doing their job perfectly." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "Martinez, I'm assigning Captain Stevens as your wingman for the approach to Target 7. He'll provide cover while you make your attack run." Captain Stevens, one of the most experienced pilots in the squadron, nodded acknowledgement. Sarah could see in his eyes that he wasn't entirely comfortable with the assignment, but he was professional enough to follow orders without complaint. "One final point," Colonel Peterson added. "Intelligence reports suggest the enemy may have received advanced fighter aircraft from their allies. Be prepared for air-to-air combat in addition to your ground attack missions. Stay sharp, watch each other's backs, and remember your training." As the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, Sarah climbed into her F-35 cockpit for the first time in a combat situation. The advanced displays came to life, showing her aircraft systems, navigation data, and tactical information. She ran through the startup checklist with practiced efficiency, but her hands were trembling slightly from adrenaline. The radio crackled to life with air traffic control instructions and coordination between the pilots. Sarah listened as each pilot reported ready for takeoff. When her turn came, she keyed her microphone. Lightning 7 ready for departure. Roger, Lightning 7. You are cleared for takeoff. Good hunting. Sarah pushed the throttles forward, feeling the incredible power of the F-35's engine pushing her back into her seat. The aircraft accelerated down the runway with breathtaking speed, and within seconds she was airborne, climbing into the storm-darkened sky. As the squadron formed up and headed toward enemy territory, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. Everything she had worked for her entire career had led to this moment. In less than 2 hours, she would either prove herself as a combat pilot, worthy of respect, or she would be dead. There was no middle ground in aerial combat. The flight toward enemy territory took 45 minutes, with the squadron maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. Sarah flew in formation with Captain Stevens, her designated wingman, while monitoring her instruments and scanning the sky for threats. The storm clouds had moved in faster than predicted, turning the morning sky dark and turbulent. As they approached the target area, Colonel Peterson's voice crackled through the radio with updated intelligence. All Lightning aircraft, be advised. We have confirmed enemy fighter activity in your operational area. Satellite imagery shows at least 6 enemy aircraft patrolling the region. Stay alert and be ready to engage. Sarah's heart rate increased as she processed this information. She had trained extensively in air-to-air combat, but this would be her first real engagement against enemy fighters who were actively trying to kill her. The F-35's advanced radar systems began detecting contacts ahead, showing multiple enemy aircraft positioned to intercept the incoming strike force. Lightning 7, this is Lightning 2. Captain Stevens called over a secure channel. I'm showing multiple bandits at 2 o'clock, approximately 30 miles out. Looks like they're moving to intercept us. Sarah checked her radar display and confirmed the contacts. 6 enemy fighters were climbing toward them, clearly intent on preventing the strike mission from reaching its targets. The timing was critical, because the coordinated attack had to happen within the predetermined window, or the mission would fail. Lightning leader to all aircraft. Colonel Peterson transmitted. We're splitting into 2 groups. Lightning 1 through 6 will engage the enemy fighters while Lightning 7 through 12 continue to the targets. We cannot afford delays. This meant Sarah would be proceeding to her target without the air-to-air protection she had been counting on. Captain Stevens would stay with her as planned, but they would be vastly outnumbered if enemy fighters pursued them. Lightning 7, are you comfortable proceeding without additional cover? Stevens asked over their private channel. Affirmative, Lightning 2. Let's complete this mission. As the squadron split apart, Sarah watched the first group of F-35s accelerate toward the enemy fighters. Within minutes, she could see missile contrails in the distance as the air-to-air battle began. Her radio filled with terse combat communications as pilots engaged in deadly aerial duels. Missile inbound, Lightning 3, break right. I've got tone on the lead bandit, Fox 3. Lightning 4 is hit, I'm losing hydraulics but staying in the fight. Sarah forced herself to focus on her own mission rather than the air battle, raging behind her. Her target, the enemy communication hub, was still 15 minutes away, and she needed to concentrate on the complex approach required to penetrate the heavily defended position. The weather had deteriorated significantly, with heavy rain and turbulence making flight conditions challenging. Sarah's F-35 was buffeted by strong winds as she descended to attack altitude, staying below enemy radar coverage. The advanced stealth capabilities of her aircraft would help her avoid detection, but she still had to be careful about her approach, angle, and timing. Lightning 7, I'm picking up surface-to-air missile sites around your target, Stevens warned. I count at least 4 active radar systems, and they're all pointed in our direction. Sarah's threat warning system began chirping, softly, indicating that enemy radars were scanning the area but hadn't yet locked onto her aircraft. The F-35's stealth technology was working, but she knew it wouldn't provide complete protection once she began her attack run. As they approached the target area, Sarah could see the enemy installation through her aircraft's advanced sensors. The communication hub was a cluster of buildings surrounded by defensive positions, with several large antenna arrays and satellite dishes. Destroying this facility would severely disrupt enemy coordination across the entire front. Lightning. 2. I'm beginning my attack approach, Sarah transmitted to Stevens. Maintain overwatch position and watch for enemy fighters. Copy that, Lightning 7, I've got your back. Sarah armed her weapons systems and began her descent toward the target. The F-35's sophisticated targeting computer calculated the optimal attack profile, taking into account wind conditions, target hardening, and the locations of enemy defenses. She would have one chance to make this attack successful. As she approached the release point for her missiles, Sarah's threat warning system suddenly erupted with alarms. Multiple surface-to-air missile sites had locked onto her aircraft and were preparing to fire. The enemy had detected her approach despite the stealth technology. Lightning 7, you've got multiple SAM launches, Stevens called out urgently. I count 6 missiles inbound. Sarah's training took over as she initiated evasive maneuvers while simultaneously launching her own attack. The F-35 released its precision-guided missiles toward the communication hub, just as enemy missiles began exploding around her aircraft. She pulled into a sharp climb, dispensing chaff and flares to confuse the incoming threats. The first enemy missile passed close enough that Sarah could see the warhead as it streaked past her cockpit. The second missile detonated close behind her, and she felt her aircraft shudder from the blast effects. Warning lights began flashing on her instrument panel, indicating damage to several systems. Lightning. 7, your aircraft is trailing smoke, Stevens reported. Are you hit? Sarah quickly scanned her instruments while continuing evasive maneuvers. She had lost some hydraulic pressure, and her right engine was running rough, but the aircraft was still controllable. More importantly, her targeting system confirmed that both her missiles had struck the communication hub, which was now burning and clearly destroyed. Lightning 2, I've got some damage, but I'm still flying. Target 7 is destroyed, mission accomplished. Before Stevens could respond, 2 enemy fighters appeared from behind a cloud bank, obviously drawn to the area by the missile launches. Sarah's damaged F-35 was in no condition for air-to-air combat, but the enemy pilots didn't know about her mechanical problems. Lightning 7, we've got company, Stevens warned. 2 enemy fighters approaching from the northwest, and they're coming fast. Sarah's mind raced as she evaluated her options. Her aircraft was damaged and low on fuel from the evasive maneuvers. The enemy fighters were fresh and looking for a fight. Running away would be the smart tactical decision, but it would also leave Stevens to face 2 enemy aircraft alone. Lightning. 2, suggest we egress the area immediately, Sarah transmitted. Negative. Lightning 7. These bandits are positioned to intercept other members of our strike force. We need to engage them here. Sarah realized Stevens was right. If these enemy fighters were allowed to continue toward the other target areas, they could disrupt the entire mission and possibly shoot down other F-35s. Despite her aircraft damage, she had to stay and fight. Roger, Lightning 2. I'm with you, let's take these guys down. The 2 enemy fighters had spotted them and were accelerating to attack position. Sarah could see missile smoke as they launched their opening salvo, 2 heat-seeking missiles streaking toward her damaged aircraft. Her threat warning system screamed warnings as she pulled into another series of violent, evasive maneuvers. The first missile lost track when she deployed flares, but the second one stayed locked onto her aircraft's hot exhaust. Sarah pushed her damaged F-35 to its limits, pulling G-forces that made her vision tunnel and her breathing labored. At the last possible moment, she managed to break the missile's lock by diving into a cloud bank and cutting her engine power. When she emerged from the clouds, she found herself in perfect position behind one of the enemy fighters. Her targeting system locked onto the aircraft, and she fired one of her remaining air-to-air missiles. The enemy pilot never saw the attack coming, and his fighter exploded in a brilliant fireball. Splash 1, Sarah called out, using the standard term for a confirmed kill. But the celebration was premature. The second enemy fighter had positioned himself behind Stevens and was closing in for a kill shot. Sarah's wingman was desperately maneuvering to avoid enemy fire, but his aircraft was taking hits from the enemy's cannon. Lightning. 2, you're taking fire. Brake left and dive. Stevens followed her instructions, but the enemy pilot was skilled and stayed with him. Sarah realized she had to act immediately or watch her wingman die. Despite her aircraft damage and low fuel, she pushed her throttles forward and dove toward the enemy fighter. Sarah's damaged F-35 screamed through the air as she dove toward the enemy fighter that was pursuing Captain Stevens. Her aircraft shuddered from the strain, and warning lights continued flashing across her instrument panel. The right engine was losing power steadily, and she could feel the controls becoming more sluggish with each passing moment. The enemy pilot was so focused on shooting down Stevens that he didn't notice Sarah's approach until it was too late. She fired her last air-to-air missile from point-blank range, and the enemy fighter disappeared in a massive explosion. Debris from the destroyed aircraft peppered her canopy, cracking the reinforced glass but not penetrating the cockpit. Splash. 2, Sarah called out, breathing heavily from the stress and G-forces. Lightning 2, are you okay? Stevens' voice came through the radio, strained but relieved. Lightning 7, you just saved my life. I owe you one. Let's call it even and get out of here, Sarah replied, checking her fuel gauge with growing concern. The evasive maneuvers and high-power combat had consumed fuel at an alarming rate, and her damaged engine was burning even more than normal. As they turned toward home base, Sarah tried to assess the full extent of her aircraft's damage. In addition to the engine problems and hydraulic issues, her navigation system was intermittently failing, and she was having difficulty maintaining stable flight. The cracked canopy was letting in cold air and rain, making the cockpit uncomfortable and reducing visibility. Lightning 7, how's your aircraft holding up? Stevens asked, pulling alongside to perform a visual inspection. Sarah looked over to see Stevens flying close formation, examining her F-35 for damage. His expression was serious as he evaluated what he could see from the outside. I can see significant damage to your right engine nacelle, Stevens reported. There's also what appears to be shrapnel damage along your fuselage. You're definitely leaking fuel. This was not good news. Sarah was still over enemy territory with a damaged aircraft that was losing fuel. The flight back to base would normally take 40 minutes, but with her engine problems, it might take longer. She began calculating whether she had enough fuel to make it home. Before she could complete her calculations, Stevens' urgent voice cut through the radio. Lightning 7, we've got more problems. I'm picking up 2 more enemy fighters climbing toward us from the northeast. Range approximately 20 miles and closing fast. Sarah's heart sank as she realized their situation had just become desperate. Her aircraft was barely flyable, she was low on fuel, and she had no missiles left. Stevens still had weapons, but 2 against 2 were not good odds when one of the friendly aircraft was severely damaged. Lightning 2, suggest you proceed home at best speed, Sarah transmitted. I'll try to evade these bandits and follow you back. Negative, Lightning 7, I'm not leaving you alone out here. That's not a suggestion, it's an order, Sarah replied, even though she technically didn't outrank Stevens. Your aircraft is undamaged and you have a full weapons load. You can make it back to report mission success, I'm just slowing you down. Stevens was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the decision. Military doctrine said that pilots should not abandon wounded comrades, but it also emphasized the importance of preserving combat-effective aircraft when possible. Lightning 7, I'm staying with you. We'll figure this out together. Before Sarah could argue further, her radar warning receiver began screaming as the approaching enemy fighters locked onto both F-35s with their targeting systems. The enemy pilots had found them and were preparing to attack. Lightning 2, they've got us locked up. We need to go defensive immediately. Both pilots began evasive maneuvers as the enemy fighters launched missiles. Sarah's damaged F-35 responded slowly to her control inputs, and she struggled to generate the aggressive maneuvering needed to avoid the incoming threats. Stevens, with his undamaged aircraft, was able to evade more effectively and even managed to fire back at the attacking fighters. Sarah watched helplessly as one of Stevens' missiles destroyed an enemy fighter, but the remaining bandit continued to press his attack. This pilot was clearly skilled and aggressive, using the superior maneuverability of his aircraft to stay behind Sarah's damaged F-35. Lightning 7, you've got a bandit on your tail and I can't get a clear shot. Stevens called out, try to break right and climb. Sarah attempted the maneuver, but her damaged aircraft couldn't generate enough power to climb effectively. The enemy fighter was closing in for the kill, and she could see muzzle flashes from his cannon as he opened fire. Bullets struck her aircraft, causing even more damage to systems that were already failing. Suddenly, an idea occurred to her. It was dangerous and possibly suicidal, but it might be their only chance. Sarah keyed her radio to speak to Stevens. Lightning 2, when I give the signal, I want you to pull up sharply and get clear of the area. What are you planning, Lightning 7? Something crazy. Just trust me and be ready to move when I call. Sarah waited until the enemy fighter was directly behind her, close enough that the pilot would have difficulty reacting to sudden maneuvers. Her damaged F-35 was losing altitude steadily, and she used this to her advantage by diving toward the mountainous terrain below. The enemy pilot followed. Apparently confident that he had an easy kill lined up, Sarah let him get even closer, waiting for exactly the right moment. Her aircraft was shaking violently now, barely holding together under the stress of high-speed flight and combat damage. Lightning 2, break away now, Sarah called out. Stevens immediately pulled his F-35 into a sharp climb, clearing the area just as Sarah executed her desperate plan. She pulled her aircraft into the steepest climb she could manage with her damaged engines, knowing that the enemy fighter behind her would have to pull up even more sharply to avoid flying into the ground. The enemy pilot reacted exactly as Sarah had hoped, pulling back on his controls so hard that his aircraft stalled. For a crucial moment, the enemy fighter lost speed and maneuverability, giving Stevens the opportunity he needed. Fox 3, Stevens called out as he fired his last missile at the stalled enemy fighter. The missile struck the enemy aircraft dead center, destroying it completely. Sarah's desperate gamble had worked, but the violent maneuver had pushed her damaged F-35 beyond its limits. More warning lights illuminated her cockpit and she could feel the aircraft becoming increasingly unstable. Lightning 7, your aircraft is really smoking now, Stevens reported with obvious concern. I don't think you're going to make it. Back to base. Sarah checked her navigation display and confirmed her worst fears. She was still over 100 miles from friendly territory, her fuel was critically low, and her aircraft was falling apart around her. The smart decision would be to eject and hope for rescue, but that would mean spending days or weeks as a prisoner if the enemy found her first. Lightning 2, proceed to base and report mission successful, Sarah ordered. I'm going to try to make it to the emergency airfield at Checkpoint Bravo. Checkpoint Bravo was a rough landing strip used by Special Operations Forces, much closer than the main base but still a challenging flight for a damaged aircraft. It was her only realistic chance of getting home alive. Roger, Lightning 7. Good luck, and thank you for saving my life back there. As Stevens disappeared toward the horizon, Sarah was alone in the sky with an aircraft that was barely flying. She had successfully completed her mission by destroying the communication hub, helped shoot down 4 enemy fighters, and saved her wingman's life. But now came the hardest part of all, getting home alive to tell the story. Flying alone through hostile airspace in a crippled F-35, Sarah Martinez faced the fight of her life just to stay airborne. The aircraft shuddered continuously as she nursed it through the storm-filled sky, each vibration reminding her how close she was to catastrophic failure. Her right engine was now producing barely half power, and the fuel leak was getting worse by the minute. The emergency airfield at Checkpoint Bravo was still 60 miles away, but Sarah wasn't sure her aircraft would hold together that long. She had to make a critical decision: try to reach the airfield and risk crashing in enemy territory, or find somewhere closer to land and hope for rescue. As she struggled to maintain altitude, Sarah's radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Any coalition aircraft, this is Rescue 77. We have emergency teams standing by at Checkpoint Bravo. What is your status? Sarah quickly responded, relief flooding through her voice. Rescue 77, this is Lightning 7. I have a severely damaged F-35 attempting to reach Checkpoint Bravo. Engine failure, fuel leak, and multiple system failures. Request emergency landing assistance. Lightning 7, we copy your situation. We have emergency equipment positioned and medical team standing by. What is your current position and estimated time of arrival? Sarah checked her damaged navigation system, which was flickering intermittently. Rescue 7-7, I'm approximately 50 miles northeast of your position. Current speed is limited due to engine damage. Estimate arrival in 25 minutes. If I can keep this thing flying that long. Roger, Lightning 7. Be advised we have reports of enemy ground forces in your area. Stay as high as possible to avoid small arms fire, and we'll guide you in when you're within range. This news added another layer of danger to Sarah's situation. Enemy soldiers with rifles and portable missiles could easily shoot down her damaged aircraft if she flew too low. But staying high meant burning more of her precious remaining fuel, making it even less likely she would reach the airfield. As she continued flying toward the emergency strip, Sarah began experiencing new problems with her aircraft. The hydraulic systems were failing progressively, making the controls increasingly heavy and unresponsive. She had to use both hands on the stick just to keep the F-35 flying straight and level. 15 minutes into her flight to checkpoint Bravo, disaster struck. Her right engine finally gave up completely, shutting down with a series of loud bangs that shook the entire aircraft. Sarah now had only one engine to keep her massive fighter jet in the air, and the remaining engine was already working at maximum capacity. Rescue 7-7, Lightning 7, I've lost my right engine completely. Single engine flight with heavy damage. This is now a true emergency. Lightning 7, we understand. Continue direct to checkpoint Bravo. We have all emergency services activated and waiting for you. With only one engine, Sarah had to constantly adjust her flight profile to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. The aircraft wanted to roll and yaw continuously, requiring constant control inputs to maintain stable flight. Her arms ached from fighting the damaged controls, and sweat poured down her face despite the cold air coming through her cracked canopy. 20 miles from the airfield, Sarah encountered another problem. A line of severe thunderstorms had moved into the area, creating dangerous flying conditions with heavy rain, turbulence, and lightning. In a healthy aircraft, she could have climbed above the weather or found a way around it. With her damaged F-35, she had no choice but to fly straight through the storms. The turbulence was savage, throwing her aircraft around like a toy. Lightning flashed all around her, and the rain was so heavy that visibility dropped to nearly zero. Sarah had to rely entirely on her instruments to maintain control, but several of her displays were flickering or completely dead from battle. Damage. Lightning 7, we're tracking you on radar. You're 10 miles out and lined up with our runway. Begin your descent when ready. Sarah began a careful descent toward the emergency airfield, but the single engine struggled to provide enough power for a controlled approach. She was coming in too steep and too fast, conditions that would normally require a go-around and second attempt. But with her fuel situation, she would only get one chance to land. Rescue 7-7, Lightning 7 is on final approach. Single engine, no hydraulics, and critically low on fuel. This will be a dead stick landing if I have to go around. Lightning 7, the runway is clear and emergency equipment is standing by. You are cleared to land. Through the rain and darkness, Sarah caught her first glimpse of the runway lights. The emergency airfield was little more than a rough strip carved out of the jungle, but it looked like heaven to her at that moment. She lined up with the center line and began her final approach, praying that her aircraft would hold together for just a few more minutes. At 300 feet above the ground, Sarah's remaining engine began to fail. The power fluctuated wildly, and she could hear strange noises coming from the engine compartment. She was now essentially flying a glider with the aerodynamic properties of a brick. "Come on, baby, just a little farther," Sarah whispered to her aircraft as she fought to maintain control during the final approach. At 100 feet, her engine quit completely. The F-35 became a 30,000-pound glider dropping toward the runway at twice the normal landing speed. Sarah had no power, no hydraulics, and no margin for error. Everything depended on her skill as a pilot and the structural integrity of her damaged aircraft. The runway rushed up toward her as Sarah flared the aircraft for landing. She touched down hard, much harder than any normal landing, and immediately deployed her drag chute while standing on the brakes. The damaged F-35 bounced twice before settling onto the runway, then began a long, sliding stop. Sparks flew from her landing gear as the damaged aircraft skidded down the rough runway. Sarah fought to keep the fighter jet pointed straight as it gradually slowed from landing speed. Emergency vehicles raced alongside her aircraft, ready to respond if she crashed or caught fire. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the F-35 came to a complete stop just 50 yards from the end of the runway. Sarah sat in her cockpit for a moment, unable to believe she had actually made it. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion, and she was covered in sweat despite the cold air flowing through her broken canopy. "Lightning 7, are you okay?" came the voice of the rescue controller. Sarah keyed her radio with trembling fingers. "Rescue 7-7, Lightning 7 is down safe. Aircraft is severely damaged, but pilot is uninjured. Mission accomplished." Emergency crews surrounded her aircraft. Sarah began the shutdown procedures for her destroyed F-35. The fighter jet had brought her home despite damage that should have made flight impossible. She had completed her mission, destroyed her assigned target, shot down 2 enemy fighters, and saved her wingman's life. But most importantly, she had proven to herself and everyone else that she belonged in the cockpit of a frontline fighter aircraft. The same people who had questioned her abilities would now have to acknowledge that she had performed under the most extreme conditions possible and succeeded where others might have failed. Sarah Martinez, the woman who had been mocked and doubted throughout her career, had just become a combat veteran and a proven fighter pilot. The sunrise was breaking through the storm clouds as she finally climbed out of her cockpit, symbolically marking the beginning of a new chapter in her military career. The debriefing room at the main airbase was unusually quiet as Sarah entered 3 days later. Her arm was in a sling from injuries sustained during her hard landing, but she was otherwise unharmed and ready to face the questions about her mission. The same pilots who had doubted her abilities were now seated around the conference table, their expressions markedly different from the skepticism she had faced just a week ago. Colonel Peterson stood at the front of the room with a satisfied smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Thunderstrike was a complete success. All 12 targets were destroyed within the designated time frame, effectively crippling the enemy's ability to coordinate their offensive. Our ground forces have since secured the entire region without facing organized resistance." He clicked through a series of satellite images showing the destroyed enemy installations. When he reached the image of Target 7, the communication hub that Sarah had attacked, he paused significantly. Target 7 was considered the most critical and heavily defended position. Its destruction was absolutely essential to mission success, and it was also the most dangerous assignment of the entire operation. Peterson looked directly at Sarah. Lieutenant Martinez not only destroyed her assigned target under extremely difficult conditions, but she also engaged and defeated multiple enemy fighters while flying a severely damaged aircraft. Captain Rodriguez, who had been one of Sarah's harshest critics, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The pilot sitting next to him whispered something about lucky shots, but the comment fell flat in the silence of the room. Colonel Peterson continued his briefing, detailing the air-to-air combat that had occurred during the mission. In addition to successful completion of their ground attack missions, our pilots shot down a total of 8 enemy fighters with no losses to our own forces. Lieutenant Martinez is credited with 2 confirmed kills and 1 assist, all achieved while flying a damaged aircraft with limited fuel and ammunition. Captain Stevens, who had been Sarah's wingman during the mission, stood up to address the room. "Sir, I'd like to add something to the official record. Lieutenant Martinez saved my life during the mission. When I was being pursued by an enemy fighter and taking hits, she engaged the bandit despite her own aircraft damage and shot him down. Without her intervention, I wouldn't be here today." The room remained quiet, but Sarah could see the expressions on her fellow pilots' faces changing as they processed this information. These were professional military officers who understood the significance of what Stevens was describing. Saving a wingman's life was considered one of the highest honors in aviation. Furthermore, Stevens continued, Lieutenant Martinez demonstrated exceptional airmanship in bringing her damaged aircraft back to friendly territory. Most pilots would have ejected over enemy territory rather than attempt the flight she completed. After the formal debriefing, Sarah found herself approached by several of the pilots who had previously questioned her abilities. Captain Rodriguez was the first to speak, his expression serious but respectful. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on prejudice rather than performance. What you did during that mission was remarkable by any standard." Other pilots echoed similar sentiments, acknowledging that they had been wrong to doubt her based on her gender rather than her demonstrated skills. The transformation in their attitudes was remarkable, but Sarah knew it had come at a high price. She had literally risked her life to prove what should have been obvious from her training record and simulation scores. Later that day, Sarah received a call to report to Colonel Peterson's office. When she arrived, she found not only the colonel but also General Harrison, the base commander, and several other senior officers she didn't recognize. "Lieutenant Martinez," General Harrison began, "your performance during Operation Thunderstrike was exceptional. You not only completed your assigned mission under extreme conditions, but you also distinguished yourself in air-to-air combat and demonstrated extraordinary courage in returning your damaged aircraft to friendly territory." Sarah stood at attention, unsure what to expect from this meeting. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job." "What you did went far beyond just doing your job," the general replied. "Which is why I'm pleased to inform you that you're being awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for heroism in aerial combat. Additionally, you're being promoted to captain, effective immediately." Sarah felt her knees weaken slightly as the impact of this news hit her. The Distinguished Flying Cross was one of the highest decorations available to military pilots, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in flight operations. The promotion to captain was also significant, representing recognition of her leadership potential. "Furthermore," General Harrison continued, "you're being assigned to the elite test pilot school to help evaluate new aircraft systems. Your combination of combat experience and technical skills makes you an ideal candidate for this program." As Sarah left the general's office, she walked past the same flight line where she had first seen the F-35s that seemed so intimidating just a week ago. The maintenance crews working on the aircraft looked up and nodded respectfully as she passed. Word of her mission had spread throughout the base, and she was no longer seen as an outsider trying to prove herself. Chief Master Sergeant Thompson approached her as she reached her quarters. "Martinez, I heard about your promotion and assignment. Congratulations, you've earned every bit of it." Sarah pulled the small card from her pocket, the one Thompson's daughter had made with the childish drawing of an airplane. "Thank you for letting me carry this, Chief. It brought me luck." Thompson smiled and shook his head. "That wasn't luck, Captain. That was skill, courage, and determination. The card was just a reminder that people were counting on you to come home safe." That evening, Sarah called her father to tell him about her promotion and new assignment. His voice was filled with pride as he listened to her story. "Mija, do you remember what I told you about touching the clouds and protecting people from the sky?" "Yes, Papa. I remember." "Well, it sounds like you've done both. Your mother and I are so proud of what you've accomplished." As Sarah hung up the phone, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a young girl watching airplanes at a small Texas airport to a decorated combat pilot, she had faced countless obstacles and overcome every one of them. The mockery and discrimination she had endured were now in the past, replaced by respect, earned through performance under the most demanding conditions possible. The next morning, Sarah reported for her first day with the test pilot program. As she walked toward the hangar where experimental aircraft awaited evaluation, she no longer had to wonder whether she belonged among the elite pilots of the military. Her actions had spoken louder than any words, and by dawn after her first combat mission, 12 enemy targets were gone, and Sarah Martinez had forever changed how her colleagues viewed women in combat aviation. The woman who had once been mocked for her dreams of flying fighter jets had become a decorated combat veteran, a test pilot, and an inspiration for future generations of female aviators who would follow in her contrails across the sky.